Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
You are about to listen to the Totally Super Awesome 80s Reboot Overdrive podcast.
This podcast is our fan tribute to the Incredible Hulk TV show. Be advised that has been exposed to radiation and we caution to listen at your own risk. You have now entered GammaCast.
And welcome to the GammaCast. I'm your host, Charlie, the Professor Esser. And with me, as always, is the brilliant, the intelligent, the complex and beautiful.
I'm like, wow, I don't know who that is, but I'm here. 80s music girl. Sorry, Charlie.
No, it's okay. Hey, you know what? Here's I had this conversation with Phil the other day on Super Connectivity, and it's just, you know what? I work with some amazingly talented podcasters. You and Phil and Maz and Lilith and Tyler, and you know what? I do a lot of self-aggrandizement. I call myself the professor. I want to make sure that every podcast I do, I take a moment to acknowledge how amazing the people I work with are. And
that's awesome, and I appreciate that very much.
Okay, yeah.
But I can't resist a joke.
No,
I really can't.
It is not.
Sometimes I am my worst enemy.
No, it's, you know what, 80s music girl, it's fine. I appreciate it, and I love it about you. It's one of the things that make you such a fantastic podcaster. Tonight's episode, Interview with the Hulk, Season 4, Episode 15, first air date, April 3rd, 1981. Emerson Fletcher, a colleague of Jack McGee, at the register steals a lead on the Hulk. Recognizing David Butler for who he really is, Fletcher blackmails Banner into giving him an interview. Directed by Patrick Boyriven. Writers on this episode, of course, Kenneth Johnson, who gets his developed for television by credit, and Alan Cassidy. This is a flashback episode. No denying that. It is a flashback episode. It is certainly something they created because it was way cheap to do. But for a show created for its fiscal responsibility, this was a good episode.
It was.
It was. We have at our core here a character by the name of Emerson Fletcher, played wonderfully by the great Michael Conrad. You may know him from Hill Street Blues as Sergeant Esterhaus. And it's kind of I guess it's funny. You think about shows, especially shows that ran for a long time, and you think about the distance between them, and you realize, oh, actually, that one ended and this one started pretty close together. But the character of Emerson Fletcher, I loved. Even as he's being a real jerk to Jack McGee. Throughout the entire episode. But this actually confirmed what is my long-held theory on Jack McGee. Which is that Jack McGee is mostly working the science beat at the register. Yeah. Because that he and Emerson Fletcher, who is clearly a science beat reporter, are, they're put together, they're stuck together, and, it makes perfect sense. Because everything we've seen, Jack McGee working on throughout the series has always been science-related. And, it is... here's what I'm going to say. I don't want to say Emerson Fletcher is a better reporter than Jack McGee, because I think that Jack McGee has this inherent handicap that Banner knows who he's looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So when Emerson Fletcher starts looking for Banner, he has the upper hand.
Right.
You know, Jack McGee doesn't know who he's looking for, but David knows Jack McGee, so he always knows to do that quick turn away before Jack can recognize him.
Right.
But because Emerson figures it out, he gets a step ahead. And it's easy to see him as the guy who figures it out, but really, I think had Jack McGee gotten the phone call, he would have been there. You know, he would have figured it out too. That's my belief. I don't know. But to give you an understanding, we have this. They're doing renovations at the registrar's office, and they have jammed Jack McGee and Emerson Fletcher in the same office. And Emerson is a chain smoker.
Yes.
Which is interesting for a science reporter, I think.
Right.
You know, as a science reporter, but he's still. Although I have to call this out because this is one of my favorite things when I see it. Did you see what brand of cigarettes he's smoking?
No, I missed that.
Okay.
Is it Lucky Strike?
No. It's a made-up brand because it's always a made-up brand in these things.
Yeah, that's
But the
true.
made-up brand they used, which I love every time I see it, it's Victory cigarettes.
Yeah.
It has the big V on it for Victory.
Uh-huh.
And of course, that's the brand name in 1984. If you ever read 1984 or seen any of the movies of 1984, everything is branded as Victory. And this is important because we have a very interesting actress in this by the name of Jan Sterling, who plays Stella Verdugo, and one of her very early credits back in 56.
Yeah.
I'm just swinging back here. She is in a very early adaptation of 1984 as Julia. In 1956, she plays Julia of The Outer Party. That's the love interest for Winston. And I love that. And you actually, there's actually a great little picture. You see her at one point in this episode where she's calling Jack McGee, and she does like beautiful ingenue, a photograph in black and white of the beautiful, and that's Jan Sterling. And I thought that was I love that tie-in between them. I don't know if those are Victory cigarettes expressly to reference 1984. But I guess on some level, I just always hope it is.
Right. But
that's
the another thing I noticed about the pictures, that's the one that they used for her IMDb profile.
Yes. I don't know if that was intentional, but it certainly makes it easy to reference back to this episode.
It definitely does.
Well, that was
thank you, IMDb.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Here's what I'll say. That is obviously her headshot. That was obviously her publicity still. So it makes sense that that's the one that you're going to find there. I always find it interesting whenever you go through IMDb and because I mean she's been around. She was working all the way to 1988 when she was in the TV series Baby Boom. So she has certainly been around. She's done little parts here and there. The only thing I see her having a regular recurring role in is Backstairs to the White House, which was in 1979, where she played Mrs. Lou Hoover. But aside from that, she does have a history, and of course you go back in time and you see her all over the place in the 40s and 50s. As is sadly always the case, you see a good actress who gets a lot of work when she's young, and then when people no longer want young actors, at least actresses, that the work falls off, and that always makes me a little sad.
Me too.
Yeah, but anyway, but but here she is in one of her later roles as a crazy lady.
Mm.
But a delightful crazy
Clearly
lady.
has a thing for Jack McGee.
Well, who wouldn't? He is a delightful young man.
Oh, yeah. Let me raise my hand to that one.
Although let me say this, I was a little taken aback when Emerson Fletcher says he's 46 and on probation as a reporter. Because I'm looking at Emerson and I was like, I'm 42. And
Yeah.
I really...
You've lived a hard life, man.
Yeah, clearly. This was the man... Well, he's a chain smoker. So...
Well, there you go.
And of course, Jack had spent $500, which was a lot of money back then.
That's a ton of money.
$500 to stop smoking. And...
Which obviously didn't work.
Well, it had worked until he met Emerson Fletcher, who is kind of a jerk,
A little bit. But he's the yin to Jack's yang, I guess.
Yeah.
He's a little bit more relaxed and subdued, probably from all the cigarettes, I guess. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But Jack McGee's a bit hyper.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of sad when you think of that. If these two could have been friends, had they shared a byline, they might have actually really done great things.
Yeah.
But Emerson Fletcher is very much Jack's foil in this, and
yeah, I totally think that even if he, what happened when in his life at that time before, fast forward to all of the things that had happened to him, he was way out of Jack's league anyway.
Well, you see, that's the thing I don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting thing with Jack McGee.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have seen in the past that other reporters do admire Jack McGee as an investigative reporter.
Right.
And I do wonder if maybe Jack McGee was this great investigative reporter.
Right.
Who took the money job at the Register. Because I kind of felt that he was the name on the mass, the name reporter. When this rag started in the 1960s, and they needed a name to sort of put with them, to grant legitimacy to them. I kind of feel they picked up young, impressive reporter Jack McGee.
Right.
And I get the feeling that over the years, maybe that's why he wound up on the science beat, not because he was drawn to science. I have this is my grand dream in life right now. It's just write what I call the Jack McGee files, which is just all of Jack McGee's stories in this 70s Hulkiverse, and this idea that Jack McGee was this great investigative reporter. He wound up on the science beat expressly because that was the one thing he could do at the Register that would be tied to reality.
Right. And
the reason why he loves the Hulk is because the Hulk is real. And if you can have that this insane story that the Register would publish that is real, it grants legitimacy to his work at the Register.
Right.
I mean, my look at the psychology of Jack McGee is pretty in depth. But Emerson Fletcher, he is an interesting character too because, of course, he does not believe in the Hulk. He thinks the Hulk is just more bigfootery from the Register. But he is also desperate enough that once that call comes in for Jack, he's going to steal it.
Well, yeah, he's got to get back on top.
He's got to. And you know what? As much as he wants to look down on Jack McGee, he must have understood that Jack McGee was onto something.
Yeah.
And, and then, of course, he forges the signature on the travel voucher, and and goodness me, man, 1981, when newspapers just had just so much money on hand that you could steal that $160, at a time when $500 was an insane amount of money to spend to quit smoking. And, there's some great relativity here in this episode where you can say, oh, well, that references that, and that tells you how much he stole. To get to the location on what is really just an oddball lead. This person who's saying they saw the Hulk, and we know from Jack McGee's own statements that, hey, I get so many people, and you got to vet them. But of course, here Emerson vets right and winds up there.
Right.
And I love his interaction with Stella Vertigo. And I love this because you have Stella saying, "Oh yes, I heard him scream, and so I looked out the window with my binoculars." But then as she's telling the story, you realize she was looking out the window with her binoculars or her opera glasses beforehand.
Exactly.
She just liked to watch, men lifting big boxes.
There you go.
No shame in that. But she's giving her own story to preserve her social standing, I'm sure.
Well, yes.
In her apartment building that says single rooms available, six to an apartment allowed.
Jeez.
Yeah. I actually live 6 to an apartment right now, but we're at least a 2-bedroom. So
there you go.
A lot of small things, children running around. Anyway, moving right along. But of course, and this of course is what's important with Emerson is that when he looks through the opera glasses, he immediately recognizes David Banner.
Yeah.
Because, as we find out a couple scenes later, he is like a premier science reporter, and they make a big deal about his piece on the Salk vaccine, which, not for nothing at this point, was 30 years ago.
Right.
But this idea that he was a guy who could take very complex scientific ideas and present them in a way that the popular society could understand and embrace.
Right.
Which is a good and beautiful thing. There's no denying that. And it is certainly a talent. But here he is, down in hard times because of his own trauma, which we get to as he starts the interview with David.
Right.
Of course, he does confront David. He says, "I know who you are. I know what's going on. I'm going to," and he presents himself as from a different magazine. He presents himself as from his old magazine, I'm assuming.
Right.
Which was, it wasn't Scientific American, but I think he said it was like the National Science Review or something, but meant to be a clearly recognized high-end scientific journal.
Right.
And so David is willing to talk to him, and they get their conversation. And you know what kind of was interesting? Because this was an interesting thing about this episode, because they do basically run through the past 4 seasons and give you highlights of the Hulk story. But it struck me almost immediately, and this is just my nerdery, my science nerd thing, where he makes the point about, he exposed himself to the gamma radiation, but it didn't give him the strength. There were no side effects immediately. But what struck me about that was that, well, obviously it wouldn't be side effects immediately. Everyone is around when there are solar flares.
Right.
So the fact that you were at, that you were there at a solar flare didn't give you superhuman strength. It had to be the gamma combined with the outrage or the intense emotion to trigger the Hulk effect or the strength effect. And that was pretty obvious once you stopped to think about it, that it couldn't just be the radiation.
Right.
Because if it was just the radiation, then these people would, during a solar flare, just have superhuman strength for no particular reason.
Right.
You need both the emotion and the gamma radiation. Yeah. But in retrospect, that's just my little nerdery. I always, every so often they'll say something that'll make me go, "Hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense scientifically." In a show about a man who turns into a giant green monster and then turns back into a regular-sized human being with no explanation for the change in mass. So, but so he goes and he starts telling Emerson his story, and then we see that Emerson's story is that of the loss of his 8-year-old daughter.
Right.
To cystic fibrosis, which is, you know, it is still a devastating disease in this day and age. Although, you know, of course, treatments have advanced a lot in 30 years. But we see that Emerson made a choice.
Yeah.
To enroll his daughter in an experimental treatment. That did not work.
Right.
And it's in its own way, it's devastating as you see these flashbacks, because you see his daughter enduring this pain, and you have to imagine that the pain is treatment related, not illness related.
Right.
You know what I mean? And when his daughter dies, he feels responsible because he put her in the trial. Now, truth be told, as a point on this trial, it could well have been that his daughter was just in the placebo group. Although I think modern medical ethics say that you can't put someone who is sick in an actual placebo group.
Right.
But you know, I don't know if that was the case in the 1980s or 1970s when his daughter died, because we do see that she dies in 1975.
Right.
67 to 75, 8 years old. I mean, one can understand his pain about it. But you know, this is the trauma of it. This is something that David comes back to at the very end with it, where he says, you know, it is important to me that I could tell someone my story and have them not only understand the science, but have empathy for what I'm going through.
Exactly.
During this time, Ms. Vertigo has called back to the register, and now they've tracked down where she's from and how to find her, and they do in fact find her, as Emerson is starting to have his second thoughts about what he's doing, and he tells David that he actually works for the register.
Yeah, he can't no longer continue the charade. Yeah, there's too many parallels in their life for him to drop a dime on it like that. So.
And then David steals the tapes and puts them in his leather satchel, as you do.
Yes, with belligerent righteousness. I will take these. These are mine.
Yeah.
I'm going to shove them in my brown bag and off I go.
Yes, but of course he doesn't get to go off because Jack McGee is there and has naps. Yes. And, you know, of course, Stella goes to call the police and she needs a dime.
Yeah.
Which is weird because I did not realize this predated 911, but apparently it does. And, but what I love about this is that he throws her a dime and she grabs it. And Jack is surprised she grabbed it.
Yeah.
Which sits at me as like this weird thing where it's like, well, first off, if you are surprised she actually caught it, why did you throw it?
This is true.
You know,
I think he's trying to see that maybe she's not quite as helpless as she claims.
Well, no, clearly. This is Stella. She, in her day, was quite the woman. as much as Phil, or not Phil, I want to call him Philestros, which is his character, Emerson Fletcher. As much as Emerson Fletcher is very negative towards her, and negative towards everyone. Like I said, he's really a jerk in this. Which will get.
He's a subtle jerk, though.
He's a subtle. Well, 'cause what he is he's enamored of his own intellect and self-righteousness, and that never ends well. That's all I'm gonna say.
No.
It never, ever, ever ends well when you are full of your own hubris. But I guess it ends okay. Well, I mean, honestly, we don't know how it ends for him. Honestly, it seems like he maybe gets fired. But he has already called the police. He has already called the news crew. Which, again, this is one of these things where I'm like, really? They're shooting on film? Because you see the camera guy and the guy carrying the battery. Maybe he's the sound guy too. I'm not sure, but you can see that's clearly a film camera, not a digital camera in 1981.
Right.
But then again, I don't know. Were they still shooting television news on film in the
maybe.
I don't know. Although it was 8mm film, so I kind of felt that wasn't appropriate because that was clearly at least a 35mm camera they were shooting at.
Right.
But when they actually show the film that falls out, it's clearly probably at most 8mm. So
right.
Just to give that thing. But the Hulk hulks out because he needs to break out, and so he tries to bust through the window because he can't open the window. Winds up cutting his hand, and that is more than enough to trigger a Hulk effect, which then results in the Hulk smashing through the wall. You see the Jack go out with his dart gun, and of course, as always, the first one he misses, and then he forgets to reload it when he takes the second shot at the Hulk, which I felt was weird, but I'll give the fog of war.
Yeah.
And, of course, the Hulk smashes everything, so there's no record of him, but he does get away.
Yeah.
And then we get Emerson and Jack talking, and Jack is like, come on, tell me what you know. And Emerson has all the tapes, because he took them out of David's bag, because he didn't want to leave them around for Jack to find.
Right.
And, as he says, the guy never told me anything, Yeah. Because he was with him for 2 days, but he didn't tell him anything. And then Emerson, in classic jerk fashion, after Jack has been talking about how hard it was for him to quit smoking, hands him a cigarette.
Yep.
And lights it up for him.
Yeah.
And that's how we end the episode, with Jack realizing he's smoking again, and just, which I felt, I wonder how much R.J. Reynolds spent for that.
Yeah.
To have not only the science guy being totally a smoker, but to have him want other people to smoke too. I mean, it's like, dude, that can't be good.
No.
But we only got one Hulk out this episode, which is rare.
Yeah. I
mean, we cut to scenes of the Hulk, but really, Lou got very little to do this episode, and I feel bad whenever that happens. The first Hulk out is off screen, and then David, for some reason, hangs around afterwards to sort of apologize for the damage the Hulk did. Which is weird, but what are you gonna do?
Just go on with your job and clean up the mess.
Yeah, but that
get out of town.
And that helps Emerson see him, because Emerson apparently not only knows David Banner from previous scientific work, but was apparently carrying around a picture of David Banner with him. I mean, maybe that was in McGee's Hulk file. After all, that's the start of it. But it seemed like a very odd picture that he had of him. But
right.
But then again, everyone has a picture of someone here because you have the Polaroid of Emerson, which I'm guessing was somehow from his ID photo. But anyway, it ends off as we have, and of course we've cued the Lonely Man theme yet again, because we do cue the Lonely Man theme several times through this episode, because it's two lonely guys in an apartment trying to talk about how science has failed them.
Uh-huh.
Which is sad in its own way. And that is the end of the episode. Any final thoughts, Itty's Music Girl?
You know, the fact that, well, let's just start off with Michael Conrad. Amazing to see him, and I loved him in Hill Street Blues and was so sad, you know, when he passed away.
Yeah.
You know, during that time. And I always liked him in any character that he played, because he was just one of those people who's just, you know, he's a towering person to start with, but he's just very matter of fact, and he didn't really pull any punches with anybody, so it only stood to reason that Emerson Fletcher was the same type of person, that, you know, he's going to do what he's going to do, and regardless of who it affects in whatever manner. The fact that David just, you know, tell me that you're not from the Register and I will just tell you my whole life story. He just really just laid it out, and I thought, wow. But that only happens, like he said, once he finished the interview, that he'd been running for so long and hiding for so long, and he couldn't tell anybody what happened, and he'd been searching for a cure, and he felt responsible, you know, for his wife's death, and it was just, you know, so much pent up inside of him that it just, the floodgates were open. I actually think he probably talked for 2 days. You know, we didn't necessarily see that in the episode, but he probably did, you know. And here is this, you know, journalist who he knew, he was well respected in scientific circles, and David knew of him. So it was just like, that was a connection that he felt like, okay, well, this guy's legit. Let me go ahead and, if anybody would understand, it would be him. And truthfully, the only reason he did understand was because of the anguish that he went through with his daughter. And, you know, the funny part, David says, you know, this Mr. McGee, he says, I really don't think he really cares about me as a person. I would have never been able to tell him any of this, because the only thing he cares about is Creature.
Yeah.
And, you know, basically insinuating that, you know, and he's done that in the past. You know, he's like, I want the Creature, I don't want the man. You know, well, sorry. You kind of get both. They kind of both go hand in hand.
Yeah, I do think that sells Jack a little short, but that's my own personal opinion. I mean, I think very highly. I mean, I think Jack wants the monster, but I think that honestly, I think that if David actually really approached Jack ever, they might have found common ground.
I think so too, and I think a lot of times when you've had the end of the episode and Jack's just gotten so close, you know, to the Creature, and even David himself, it's just like you see like that hesitation. You know, it's just like he knows. You know, and I'm not agreeing with you just because you said it, but you know, upon recollection, he does know that they are a separate entity. You know, but they're also the same, and I think that confuses him. You know, his reporter side, his journalistic ambitions, he just can't. He's not going to rest until he gets the story. And perhaps maybe when he started out in 1960, he was that young, bright-eyed reporter that was looking for the best scoop, and you know, he would have immediately quintuplets. Absolutely, let me go and interview the doctor that delivered him and all of that.
I don't know.
But
I think the quintuplets was a lousy story to do even 1960.
You know what? They had to think of something that was amazing. And you don't have 5 kids all at once, and it doesn't happen every day. But I think, me personally, no, of course not. Who could afford the fertility drug? Anyway, but me personally, I kind of look at this as, okay, Jack McGee kind of used to be a good reporter, but he's become so self-absorbed and obsessed with the Hulk that he's kind of, he's okay. He's not amazing. He's just okay. Kind of a thing.
There you go. And that, I think, will be our final word on this episode. 80s Music Girl, if folks would like to reach out to you to talk about anything 80s or 80s music or anything at all, how can they find you?
I am at 80s Music Girl on Twitter, 80s Music Girl on Instagram, and 80s Music Girl on Facebook.
Awesome. And of course, you can always write to me in that old-fashioned email way at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. Superconnectivityblog is all one word. I also want to give a quick plug here to the Capes and Lunatics podcast, where myself and Phil Parrish and Tyler, and who I do not know his last name, and Lilith Hellfire are doing a wide-ranging new series of podcasts on the Southgate Media Network, covering everything from TV, movies, comic books, and other bits of genre fiction that you may not have felt have been covered yet in the Southgate Media Network. If you are a fan of Riverdale, we've got Riverdale fans. We've got Harry Potter fans. And these are not things that are normally covered here, and now they're being covered over at Capes and Lunatics. So look for that in your local feed of podcasts, whether that's Stitcher or iTunes or SoundCloud or whatever other versions there are out there. Go look for us. In the meantime, we've already said you can write to me in that old-fashioned email way at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, sadly not to live tweet the Incredible Hulk 7 o'clock on Saturdays now that MeTV has taken it off of there. It's now over at Heroes and Icons, 140 here in New Jersey. But sadly, I'm at work at 5 o'clock on weekdays, so I cannot participate in any live tweeting there. But you can still follow me on Twitter when I do live tweet something at Charlie Esser. That's CharlieEsser. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. 80s Music Girl, thank you for joining us. You in the audience, thank you for joining us all. Have a wonderful week, and please Hulk out with us again.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80s Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80s Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80s Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.